Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. It's episode 173, and we're in the middle of this series from the Volunteer Bootcamp webinar that we did months ago, where we're asking questions of those presenters from the Volunteer Bootcamp about recruiting, onboarding. And this week, it's all about encouraging volunteers. And we asked Paula and Dannielle questions that we weren't able to hit in the Volunteer Bootcamp webinar. And let's face it, all of us want to be able to encourage our volunteers more. That helps them, stay for the long term, maybe even take on bigger roles, bigger leadership roles, makes them realize that what they do matters. But if you're like me, this can get overlooked. So I asked Paula a bunch of questions that we weren't able to get to in the webinar, and we'll get to that in just a moment. As usual, you can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 173. At that link, you can also get access to the full Volunteer Bootcamp replay. So if you didn't watch that live, or if you didn't catch the replay later, you can now watch all 6 sessions about recruiting, onboarding, encouraging, training, empowering, and retaining volunteers. And we're halfway through here. Christmas is this week, if you're listening to this when it comes out. So we will be taking a break for Christmas and New Year, and then we'll come back and wrap up this series in January. But let's go ahead now and jump into the clip that we're going to play from Paula in the Volunteer Bootcamp original training. We'll give you a little snippet of that. And then I'll ask her those questions that we weren't able to get to in the live webinar. Here we go.
I'm so excited to be here speaking with you all in regards to encouraging volunteers. Thank you, Ministry Boost, for having me. One thing I found as one of the best ways to grow your volunteer pool is to retain your volunteer pool. And people want to be where they are wanted. People want to be where there is an excitement that they have simply walked through the door. And so one of the best ways to do that is by constantly, consistently encouraging your volunteers as like their person, right? And so it's really easy to say, thank you so much for showing up today to serve kids and students and love on families well. But in actuality, all of us that are adults on this call, that pertains to another role they are fulfilling, not necessarily their person, the value of their person. And so thank yous, I think, are great and they're important, but we want to go a little bit further and talk about how to encourage volunteers by seeing them for their innate worth and their innate value to the body of Christ. So the first thing I want to talk about is one of the best ways and easiest ways to encourage your volunteers is to make sure they are seen. Sunday, it's really simple, right? But it can get lost because Sunday is hectic. And no matter what size of the church you're at, whether it's a smaller church with, let's say, under 150 on a Sunday, or if you're in between, or if you're at a mega church, Sunday is a busy time. That is game day. And it can be very easy to kind of let the faces blur together and not take time to identify people and let them know they are seen. Their person is valued. And so one of the things I would encourage you all to do as ministry leaders or area leaders or your coaches, again, depending on the size of your church, you may need to tailor some of this for your context, but to make sure that every volunteer is known by name. I am the queen of, hey, sweetie, how you doing? Hey, bro, what's going on? Like, dap it up. I am so good at that because over the years, I have been really bad at names, but I've had to learn how to do better. There is value in knowing people's names. And so I would make sure if, as the ministry leader, if your church is too big to know everybody's name, that's fine. Then the area leader should know their name. The coach should know their name. I heard Kenny talk about like his volunteer hub leaders, those who are caring for volunteers, they should know names. There should be several people within your ministry that know that person's name. Also, during your huddles, take time to, yes, we talk about vision and information and announcements, but make sure that you save time in your huddle to see people for their celebrations and their prayer requests. Acknowledge that their life happens outside of Sunday morning. So take some time during huddle to get personal during those few minutes that you have before your families arrive. Also, in making sure people are seen. Once again, this is making sure they get a hello at the entrance, exit, and one time while they are in their environment. That is huge because if they are small group leaders or life group leaders, they can feel isolated during that time if nobody is even popping in to say hello. Do y'all have everything, waiting for a break in the conversation? This point can get a little bit sensitive as kids become students and students get older. And so if you have somebody that is interjecting into a space, make sure that that is somebody that can discern the body language in the room before they go into the room, right? You want to say hello in a fun moment, in a light moment, but not in a heavy, serious, or confidential moment. So there's a balancing act that kind of happens right there. But make sure that everyone gets a hello on the entrance, definitely on the exit, and then somewhere in between. Here's the value you provide for that, right? Volunteers need value. We have to provide value to the roles to the value they provide to us. We have to give them that same value. Here's the value for making sure volunteers are seen. People can feel invisible during the week with the laundry list of things we have to do. Help them feel seen with something they don't have to do, but want to do. All right. So I'm going to say that again. People can feel invisible with things they have to do all week. They have to go to work or the bills won't get paid. They have to do things for their kids, right? When kids are great and when they're being kids, right? And sometimes parenting is a thankless job. Have to do things. There's a lot of have to in the life of an adult. Volunteering, very practically, is not a have to. They are choosing to be there. And so let them know that you see them and you see their worth. All right. Also, when you're encouraging volunteers, not that they're just seen, but that they are also known. Back to making sure and checking in that the volunteer knows that you know they have a life outside of Sunday morning or Saturday, Wednesday, whenever you have ministry. Their situations and how to account for that, like practically call it out. And so there might be somebody, this is for example, right? This lets somebody know that you know them. There might be somebody who's been serving in your ministry as a small group leader for umpteenth amount of time, whether it's 6 months or whether it's 6 years, but you know that they love what they do. All of a sudden their work schedule changes and they have to work every other Sunday. Now, that may not work for the small group leader, right? We want people to show up consistently and every week, but where can you place them at in family ministry, kid or student ministry, so that they still feel connected to the vision? Because ultimately they want kids to know Christ. Just recently, I had a volunteer who was serving as a small group leader in one of my elementary school rooms. She got a diagnosis that was not favorable for her to continue in that position. And so we have moved her to another position that would not happen with that Sunday morning wouldn't happen without her being there. And so I loved on her well. We loved on her well. We thanked her and we immediately moved her to another position to where she can serve. That letting your volunteers know that you know them, that you care about them. Take into consideration family makeup. This is really important because families do not look all alike, right? And so Sunday mornings can be drastically different depending on the family. Does that family have a child with special needs? Are you talking to a single parent that it takes a little bit more for them to get everybody out of the house on Sunday morning by themselves? Are you talking to a couple that would love to serve together? Can you do that and make room for that? This is all helping people feel known and not treating individuals like cookie cutters. We can get in the habit of that as well, right? We know we have so many gaps and holes in our program. And we want to feel it. We want to feel it, but we want to feel it with good people who know that they are invested and that we want to invest in them on a personal level. And so with that, another story, I had a single mom that wanted to serve on Sunday morning, but she was like very honest with me. She said, Paul, listen, I am a single mother of 3 and we are new to this single parent life and I am just getting my bearings. What happens if I show up late? Right? What happens if I get there late? Nothing happens. I'm not going to fuss and like make a big deal out of it. I said, first of all, to help you get there on time, you have elementary schoolers. Let them know if they can help you get to church on time, there are donuts in the huddle room for them too, right? That was one carrot she was able to use to kind of help her kids help her get to service on time. She also communicates well with the other adults that are serving in that room, and they're all aware of her circumstance so that there's no shame or guilt in the fact that we all have different things going on in life. We can all be a part of what God is doing in our family ministries. Know if they have any health challenges. Just know the specifics. Know the specifics of your people. It goes a long way. Here's the value for this, and here's how it will help your volunteers feel encouraged. They will feel encouraged and buy into family ministry because they know that somebody cares about them outside of that role. It will encourage them that they are part of a community. If you've done one-on-ones before, I do them all the time. One of the things that continuously comes up is people say, I want to be part of a community. I want to be part of a team. They are encouraged that they are meeting that goal to be a part of a team and part of a community when they really are. And it's not just their face. When people really care about them, that encourages them. That lets them know, hey, somebody cares about me outside of, again, another thing that I just do. Here's another thing for encouragement is tell the stories. Tell the stories that happen in your ministry areas and tell it as far and as vast as you can. So one of the things we set up recently in our huddle space is a storytelling wall. The storytelling wall actually has every volunteer's picture on it from like the mini Polaroids. We took several Sundays and got everybody's picture, put their name, where they serve, we put it on the wall. And then cards where people can write stories of transformation on there. And so that is in our huddle space. We also have that in our hallway so that parents and family members who come into the hallway that might never come into our huddle space see that our volunteers and that our team is making a difference. We encourage stories with our communications team. Some of your congregations, if they have not, this is a great way also to get people to engage, might record testimonies of transformation or stories of transformation. We encourage and we name our volunteers to do those recordings, to talk about how serving in family ministry has either changed their life or they've seen change in one of the lives of their kids or students or even a parent. So use your huddle to celebrate and do stories. Use storyboards on the wall where people can see them. Use your social media, visual images, paint 1,000 words and tell the stories that go with them. If you're using social media only for information, that you might be missing. You might be missing the boat, missing some people. Encourage your volunteers by putting their stories out there and put their names with those stories. Make sure they're not faceless individuals. Get their permission, of course, but use their names so that people know that there's a real life person behind the scenes that is loving my kid well. Here's the value. Stories give inspiration and tangible results that their work is not in vain. Okay? Stories give inspiration and tangible results that their work is not in vain. And stories encourage volunteers.
All right, Paula. Well, thanks again for sharing with us at Volunteer Boot Camp. And we just played a little clip of your time there, and people can go take the free course to hear all of it. But one of the big topics that you talked about in encouraging volunteers, and it really wasn't like the main focus, it was kind of like a small piece, but people asked a lot of questions about, were huddles. The idea that like getting volunteers together, to huddle before service, all of that. Lots of questions came up with that. So the first one, somebody said 10 to 15 minutes in a volunteer huddle sounds like a very short time. Do you really get it all done in that time?
We really get it all done in that time, but we plan very intentionally for that time. So it is nothing that can come off the cuff. We plan for every single minute. We use it wisely, and we do small chunks of information. And so we just started training in our huddle on special needs. We are doing special needs training in our huddle time from now to the end of the year.
Wow.
So that's 4 months, because we only do 5 to 7 minutes of training. We're just spreading it out over the weeks to say and touch that everything that needs to be said. So literally this week we did an introduction on why special needs ministry is important. That is it. That's all we did for training. We made 3 announcements. We did celebrations and prayer in actually less than 15 minutes this week. So it can happen, but you do have to be careful with your time and intentional with your planning.
Yeah, you can't plan a 2-hour training for your huddle.
You cannot.
I mean? Yeah. All right, how about this? How do you huddle with multiple services? Somebody said, especially if one runs over into the other.
Yes. So we use, if you have multiple staff, we have multiple staff that lead huddles. And so we use that. If you do not have multiple staff, we have empowered our coaches to lead huddles. And so a coach is simply a high capacity volunteer that you as the leader are empowering and training to step into that role in your space. So it's another level of leadership development. And so when we're planning our huddle calendar, again, several months out, we bring our coaches in and they plan it with us. And so we are all on the same page when it comes to vision and what direction we're going. And so we empower our coaches to lead huddles, because when services are interchanging, that's a very busy time for staff people. And so our coaches will take the lead at those services. We have a separate space where we do huddles. So we do not do huddles in a classroom. We do them in an office. We've done them outside. We've done them on a hallway at like the end of a hallway. We do them in large group spaces, but we do not do them in classrooms. The other thing is, when you have more than one service, is that the expectation and the ask is that the volunteers from the previous service stay until the volunteers of the next service get there. So your volunteers of your second or third service have an opportunity to go to huddle and then get to their rooms and get acclimated without feeling rushed. It's very much a team mentality, in that everybody knows that the huddle is very, very valuable. And so our first service will stay and support until our second service can get there. And then our second service does the same for our third service. So it's all of those things, people overlapping, working together, developing others so that the ministry leader doesn't have to be in more than one space at one time in order to lead. But those are some things you can navigate if you have more than one worship service.
When we had 2, we were always able to do it pretty easily because there was enough time in between. Mm-hmm. It was pretty simple. 3 was a challenge because usually that meant the services were tighter. And in our case, we didn't always have the extra space, literally there was nowhere to go, in the building, to pull that off. But we would do creative things. Like we used to do, there were 2 huddles, one before the first and one after the third, and you could do either. Nice. It wasn't as great, again, it's not as good as like an actual huddle before with like your team. But there's lots of things you can do. And like you said, if you have a separate space and somebody else can lead them, you can usually pull that off, even if there's transition going on. I know it's hard. Like that person mentioned, if one runs into the other, well, then you have a different issue. If your service is running that close into the other, probably got to solve that, to solve the huddle thing. How about this? Because I think this is common, especially when you're starting out. Somebody said at Huddle, so they're doing huddles. We try to get people to share, how they're doing as well as wins and all that, but people are silent. So what can I do to engage volunteers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can find out a piece of celebratory information during the week, then you can say, hey, I talked to Nathan this week and he had some really great news. Nathan, will you share it with us? Right? Or even let Nathan know ahead of time that like you're going to throw the ball to him to share. Sometimes people feel like their celebration may not be something the whole group wants to hear, or they might be a little shy themselves. So helping to push people out there when you're not in the huddle has been extremely helpful. We've also made a space for storyboards in our environment. And so celebrations can go up on the wall. And sometimes I will just read those, that we can celebrate this. I noticed this story is new. It hasn't been up there for a while, and we'll celebrate the story that is on the wall. And so those are two ways that we encourage people to celebrate. You won't always get a celebration. So that's the other thing. Don't feel like you have to push for a celebration. You have to push for a prayer request. I would let it be natural, and I would come with my own list of celebrations. If you find that too many weeks in a row, somebody doesn't have a celebration, make sure you come with your own. It takes a while to formulate culture. And so to formulate a culture of celebration, it takes a minute. And so I wouldn't feel pressure to do it. I would just keep recasting that vision and leading people kind of to the water.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we experienced that too, where it took some time for people to get used to it and the awkwardness. And then the other thing too, like when you're talking about celebration and wins, it took time for people to learn to look for them and remember them on purpose to share it at a huddle, because they didn't initially. That's good. How about, so one person asked the question, you've got volunteers that are huddling. What about the kids of volunteers during the huddle? Do they come too? Are they playing around the room? Do they go to a room somehow together? Like, how does that work?
They're in the room. They are in the room with us, eating donuts and drinking kids' juice boxes, because a lot of our parents use that to help their kids, help them get out of the house so that they can be at Huddle on time. And so our kids are in the room. We all serve in family ministry, and so we just have our conversation and carry on. If there's a baby crying, there's a baby walking through the floor or crawling on the floor, if a parent is feeding a bottle before they go to their room, like we're really, really big on team and on family. And so we have made it normal to expect kids in the room, and we let them be kids.
That's great. You kind of answered this one already, but I do want to dig in a little bit more to some of the details. Somebody asked, can you give an example of how you do training in the huddle? And you talked about that with the special needs thing, but just to dig in a little more to the details, do you just talk about the huddle? Do you email them something during the week, to see or read or check out before? And like, how does that work?
It depends on what we're doing, but yes, there are times. So we're using a book for special needs. It's like a 6-page booklet. Those have all gone out. So everybody has it. We keep extra copies, but we'll also go over what the reading was because people may not read it. We did the same thing with our family ministry handbook. We took months to go over our family ministry handbook. I assigned quote unquote assigned 2 or 3 pages, right, to read every week. Well, Friday or Saturday night, I'd send out a text. Hey, don't forget, we're going to cover page 21 and 22 to send a reminder. But again, building culture, this team has gotten in the habit of developing something. And so we're going through our 3rd book right now. So they pretty much know that there might be something short, again, 1 or 2 pages for them to read. I will send a link if it's a YouTube video to watch in advance. My context is big on podcasts, and so we never have any pushback when we send a podcast link out. So everyone listens to the podcast, so that seems to work well. But getting the information out either the week or 2 prior that you want them to review, or sending it in a text message or email, again, empowering your coaches to send that as well if you have them, or your high-level volunteers, then that gets people ready to discuss. So they're not coming in cold, which again helps with some of that time.
Yeah. And this next question, last one about huddles, feels similar in some ways to the question about kids. But somebody asked, when guests come early, which they tend to do for us, do you have a room open where you can receive them, or do you simply set a time where you open the doors? In other words, what if you have people coming and the huddle's happening? What do you do then?
Yeah. So our doors are automatically unlocked. So anybody can come in the hallway. Because our huddles happen in a somewhat public space, our families have actually, again, been developed to respect that time. That we're huddling, we're training, we're celebrating your kids, we're praying for the day if you'll just give us a second. And so that took over a year, really, to get families to understand that. And so we're positioned in a place where we can see new families, right, that are kind of coming in and they're doing that new family kind of look around. They're not really sure what to look for. Then somebody will step out of the huddle and say, hey, thank you so much for being here. Is this your first time with us? We're huddling right now, praying for the day. We'll be right with you. And we politely ask them to wait. We haven't had any families get upset once we tell them why no one is there, right? To check them in right away or to bring their child into this space, because we are intentional about telling them we're training our team and praying for your kids. We'll be right with you.
Yeah.
And then they wait.
Yep.
Yeah.
Our building that we're located in does not actually have like a fully separate children's area. It does, but not in the sense of like a secure lockdown thing. So each room is more like that. And so the advantage of that is they don't come in until we open the doors.
That is the advantage.
Yeah. And because we do have enough time in between services, we'll have some rooms though where pickup's still happening on one side of the room, and we have like those portable dividers, and then a huddle's happening on the other side. So there's some of that, right. But largely we can keep the door shut until the huddle's over. But I do think it's important too to because in our case we don't open doors till 10 minutes before. That's fairly late, so I feel like it's on our team to be good about finishing a huddle on time, which means starting on time. And I even saw that this week with our student ministry. And it's week 2, kicking off the fall. In some ways, it's our first real week because last week was a unique thing we do every year to kind of start the fall with all students and parents. So this was like our first week of normal, student ministry. And, people were late coming to huddle, which made them late to get out there and hang with students that are arriving. And it's just one of those things huddle's important. You got to make it happen, but you do have to balance like making it work. That's right. With everything else you're doing. And sometimes if it was, we had people that didn't, weren't able to show up either, because a lot of times, I don't know if you do this, but in our student ministry, a different team is checking in than the one that is huddling. You know what I mean? That way they are available even when that's going on, which isn't always possible. But if you can do that, I think that's important. So the only question that wasn't about huddles was in reference to you talking about some of your volunteer positions, and somebody asked, what are some examples of other volunteer positions you have that don't require weekly attendance?
Yeah. So our welcome team does not require weekly attendance. Most of them serve bi-weekly or even once a month. They don't require weekly attendance because they're there to welcome, check in. They know our safety policies. Our coaches are there every week to provide that consistent face, but our welcome team is not a weekly requirement. Also, we have an administrative team that comes in and helps during the week, and they help with special projects and things like that. That is obviously not a Sunday requirement. That team solely is saved to help us get ready for Sunday. We have a team of storytellers. So our storytellers are communicators. They serve once a month for both services. So they're learning one script a month versus learning one script a week. And so that has worked well for us. I'm not really sure how other churches, Nick, do their communicators, but ours serve once a month for both services on that week. And our tech people can serve as many or as few times as well. So really the position that is weekly is really our small group leaders. Everything else is flexible.
Yeah, we're mostly the same as you. Coaches and small group leaders are weekly. Yeah. Our large group is once a month on a rotation. They do all the services, whether it's 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Although I've heard of people doing that otherwise, and it's certainly like some churches will have like video teaching, and so then I could see having a weekly host because it's not as quite as big a role as storyteller or weekly worship leader, same service. Like I could see that. That's not what we do, and I don't think it's necessarily there's good and bad with both. And I've seen a little mix. It seems like more people do if you're doing live storytelling, live host, all that. Seems like more people do a rotation once every 4 weeks or something there, but you do it as many times as you have services, so to get the most out of that time you put in. That makes sense. Cool. Well, those were all the questions that we weren't able to get to, live on the boot camp call. So thanks for taking some extra time to talk through those. And again, for spending time with us during volunteer boot camp to talk about encouraging volunteers. It's something that's really important and oftentimes overlooked.
That's great, Nick. Thank you so much.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that with Paula. She's awesome. And when I think of action items coming out of that, I just think of different ways to encourage your volunteers. And here are 3 things you can do. One is to do kind of the 5 under 5 or what floats your boat thing, where you get people to tell you what are 5 things that they like that cost under $5. And then you can use that all next year down the road to encourage them, give them a candy bar, whatever it is. Some people call that what floats your boat, and you ask the same kind of questions. Another thing is to write a note. What if you wrote a note to a volunteer each week in 2020? Or maybe you have 20 volunteers, so you don't need to write them each twice a year, and you actually write a note to other people as well, maybe parents or something like that. And then third, could you text 5 volunteers right now this week? As you're listening to this, whenever this is, whether it's when it comes out or down the road, could you text 5 volunteers this week just to tell them that you appreciate them and that you're thankful that they serve on the team and to encourage them a little bit? Those are 3 simple action steps we could take to encourage our volunteers better. As I mentioned in the top, you can get all the links and notes, access to the full volunteer bootcamp replay at nickblevins.com/episode 173. You'll want to check out the full sessions if you haven't done that already. And Christmas is coming up. We're going to take a break the next 2 weeks. If you're listening to this when it comes out, we'll pick up this series again in January, which will be a lot of fun. We'll wrap it up. We got 3 more then. So we're going to talk training volunteers with Dan Scott, empowering volunteers with John Burkmeyer, which if you've listened to the episode I did with him on this podcast, you would know he definitely knows what he's talking about there. Same for Christine Kreischer as she wraps it up, talking about retaining volunteers. And we'll ask questions to all 3 of them that we weren't able to get to in the live webinar. So I hope you have a great Christmas, a happy new year, get some rest. If you're listening to this when it comes out, and we'll pick it up in 2020, and hopefully it'll be our best year yet for all of us. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next year.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.